Well, I asked Diana before she went to Australia, 2-3 days before, because I thought it'd be a good idea that, apart from anything else, if she went to Australia, she could then think about it.
Stop everything, because the royal fairy tale you thought you knew may have been hiding a shocking secret for nearly 3 decades. A princess loved by millions, a will written in black ink, and a set of final wishes that, according to court records and private letters, may have been quietly reshaped behind closed doors. The woman at the center of it all, Princess Diana, the most photographed woman on Earth, a humanitarian icon, and a mother who tried to control one final thing before her life ended too soon. But when her will was finally opened and the real story began to emerge, people started asking one chilling question. Did the world truly honor what Diana wanted, or was something changed after she was gone? The truth begins years before that tragic night in Paris, long before the crash, long before the global mourning. In 1993, something unexpected happened. Diana, still married to King Charles III at the time, quietly sat down with legal advisors and drafted a formal last will. That detail alone stunned many people later, because in 1993, Diana was only 28 years old. 28, a young woman, famous beyond imagination, surrounded by royal protection, yet already preparing instructions for what should happen after she was gone. Why would someone so young think about that? Friends later said Diana had begun feeling deeply uneasy about her position inside the royal system. She had spoken privately about being watched, about pressure, about feeling trapped inside a machine that could not easily let her walk away. Whether those fears were exaggerated or justified, one thing is undeniable: they pushed her to document her wishes while she still could. Court records show Diana left behind an estate worth around $21 million, which after inheritance taxes became roughly $17 million. For someone who had lost the title of Hirsch after her divorce and was no longer a working royal, it was still an enormous personal fortune. But this wasn't just money sitting in accounts. It was a lifetime of belongings, jewelry, personal possessions, and memories she wanted distributed carefully, and she made that very clear. In the will, Diana named her 2 sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, as the primary heirs. But she didn't stop there. Diana also named 17 godchildren, people she personally adored, children she had held as babies and watched grow up. She even remembered her loyal butler, Paul Burrell, leaving him $50,000 in recognition of the years he stood by her side during the most turbulent moments of her royal life. But the most revealing part of Diana's estate wasn't even the will itself. It was a separate document written the day after, a deeply personal letter of wishes. In this letter, Diana explained how she hoped her belongings would be shared. 75% of her jewelry and personal items would go to William and Harry. The rest, 25%, was meant for those 17 godchildren. And this wasn't symbolic. Estimates suggested that share could have been worth around $100,000 for each child. Diana wanted them to receive meaningful pieces from her life. Objects with stories. Objects with memories. It was a reflection of who she was, someone who thought about others, even while planning the end of her own story. And then there was the jewelry. Diana's famous sapphire engagement ring, for example, the ring that once symbolized her marriage to Charles, would later become one of the most recognized pieces of jewelry in modern history. That same ring would eventually appear again decades later when William proposed to Catherine Middleton, placing Diana's legacy directly into the future of the monarchy. Meanwhile, Harry would design a ring for Meghan Markle that included 2 diamonds from Diana's personal collection. 2 rings, 2 sons, 2 women entering the royal story. And, at the center of both, Diana. But behind the emotional symbolism of those jewels lies something far more complicated. Because after Diana died on August 31st, 1997, at just 36 years old, the responsibility for carrying out her will fell to 2 people she trusted completely: her mother, Frances Shan Kidd, and her sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale. They became the executors of her estate. On paper, that meant their job was simple: follow the instructions Diana left behind, honor the will, carry out the wishes. But what happened next would remain hidden for years, without public announcement, without informing the families involved, and without consulting the parents of the godchildren Diana had specifically named. The executors went to court, quietly, and they requested something extraordinary: permission to alter the arrangements of Diana's estate. The legal move was called an arrangement, and the court approved it. The changes were dramatic. Diana had written that William and Harry should inherit their full share at age 25, but the court-approved arrangement pushed that age to 30. That meant the princes would wait 5 additional years before receiving the full inheritance, although they could access interest from the trust at 25. No detailed public explanation was given for why the change was necessary, but the most controversial change exchange involved the godchildren. Instead of receiving the 25% share Diana had intended for them, each of the 17 godchildren received just a single item from her belongings. Not valuable shares, not significant inheritances, just individual keepsakes, sometimes things described as decorative figurines or small household items. For children who were supposed to receive pieces worth potentially six figures, the difference was enormous, and the families of those children didn't even know the arrangement had happened until years later, when the details surfaced during an unrelated legal dispute involving Diana's former butler. When the story finally broke, the reaction was shock, because suddenly the world realized something unsettling. The final wishes of the most famous woman in the world, written clearly in her own hand, had been quietly reshaped after she died, and the legal reason behind it all came down to one small detail buried in Diana's letter. She had used the word wishes, not orders, not requirements. Wishes. In British law, that single word gave executors flexibility. It meant the instructions could be interpreted rather than strictly followed, and that tiny legal nuance opened the door for the entire arrangement to happen. Some historians argue Diana's mother and sister believed they were protecting William and Harry by keeping more of the estate within the family. Others say the executors simply used the discretion the law allowed them. But one uncomfortable question has never completely disappeared. If Diana didn't want those wishes carried out, why would she have written them at all? And as the dust of the estate controversy slowly settled, another emotional piece of the story began to surface. Private letters that revealed how Charles reacted to Diana's death in ways the public never expected. Because while the world believed the story of Princess Diana and King Charles III ended in bitterness, betrayal, and a cold royal divorce, something far more complicated was unfolding quietly behind palace walls after her death. And the evidence didn't come from television interviews or newspaper headlines. It came from private letters never meant for the public eye. In December of 1997, just 4 months after Diana died, Charles wrote a deeply personal letter from Highgrove House to a friend named Peter Hinton. The letter wasn't written for history books or public sympathy. It was a private exchange between two grieving men who had both lost someone they cared about. And in that letter, Charles revealed something that shocked many historians years later. Instead of talking about the monarchy, the media pressure, or the scandal surrounding their marriage, he spoke about grief, real grief, the kind that leaves a person disoriented and hollow. He described what he called an unbearable emptiness, the kind of loss that leaves someone stunned, confused, and struggling to understand how a life can disappear so suddenly. For decades, the public image of Charles had been the villain in the Diana story, the husband who had betrayed her, the prince who could not love the world's most beloved woman. But in this letter, there was no royal mask, just a man trying to process something devastating. According to royal author Christopher Anderson, the moment Charles first learned of Diana's death was explosive. When the news reached him in the early hours of August 31st, 1997, witnesses described him reacting with a raw emotional breakdown. Anderson wrote that Charles howled like a wounded animal, not the reaction of a distant ex-husband, not the reaction of a man relieved to be free from scandal, the reaction of someone who had just realized a chapter of his life had ended forever. And when Charles traveled to Paris to bring Diana's body home to Britain, a hospital nurse reportedly said he looked as though he had been struck by a devastating physical blow, pale, shocked, hollow. This emotional detail complicates the narrative the public had grown comfortable with, because in the final year of Diana's life, something unexpected had begun happening between her and Charles. The hostility that once defined their marriage had started to fade. Friends close to Diana said the two had reached a fragile but genuine understanding. They spoke more calmly. They coordinated more peacefully around their sons. Diana herself reportedly described their relationship in the final months as something close to friendship. Not romance, not reconciliation, but something human. Two people who had survived a storm together and were slowly learning how to exist peacefully afterward. One of Diana's close friends later revealed something even more surprising. According to her, Diana never fully stopped caring about Charles. Despite the betrayal, despite the public humiliation, despite the divorce that shook the entire monarchy, a part of her heart still held affection for the man she had once married at just 20 years old. And perhaps that's what makes the entire story surrounding Diana's will feel even more haunting. Because while the world focused on royal drama, palace politics, and inheritance disputes, the deeper truth was always about something far simpler: relationships. Look again at who Diana chose when she wrote her will. Her sons came first. Prince William and Prince Harry were not just heirs to her estate. They were the center of her entire life. Everything Diana did in her later years revolved around protecting them from the machinery of royal expectations that had once overwhelmed her. And in a strange way, her estate continues protecting them even today. In a 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Harry made a revealing statement when discussing the couple's decision to step away from royal duties. He said, "I've got what my mom left me, and without that we would not have been able to do this." That single sentence confirmed something powerful. Even decades after her death, Diana's legacy was still shaping the freedom and choices of her children. Then there were the godchildren, 17 of them. Diana could easily have ignored them in her estate plan. Most wealthy figures leave money only to immediate family. But Diana thought differently. She wanted the people she loved, even outside royal circles, to feel remembered. That decision alone reveals a great deal about the woman behind the crown. Diana had spent years breaking royal tradition by hugging AIDS patients, comforting hospital patients, and walking through landmine fields to raise awareness. She believed relationships mattered more than hierarchy. Titles mattered less than kindness. And that philosophy echoed even in the way she wrote her final will. She also remembered loyalty. Paul Burrell, the butler who stood beside her during some of the most emotionally difficult periods of her life, received $50,000. Not a title, not a grand royal reward, just a gesture acknowledging years of quiet support when Diana often felt isolated within palace walls. It was Diana's way of saying something simple: loyalty should be recognized. Because when a woman writes down what matters to her most, the people she loves, the relationships she values, the legacy she hopes to leave behind, those words have a way of surviving even the most carefully managed royal silence. And that may be the most extraordinary part of this entire story. Diana knew exactly who she was. She knew who mattered to her. And long before the world lost her at just 36 years old, she made sure that truth was written down forever.